Well, good evening, everybody. Alfred, I see your screen is on, so can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Yeah, you can hear me in a way? Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for joining us here, folks, for our second virtual session of the fall here, and appreciate you taking the time out of your evening, understanding we got a bit of a storm coming, I think, and lots of folks are probably doing last minute things even well into the dark here to get things perhaps prepared for whatever snow comes, but I don't think we want to complain about the moisture at this point. So before I get going, I'm just gonna walk through just a couple of introductory remarks in terms of process of the virtual meeting, and then we'll just get going right through the agenda that was included in your package that was sent to you. So hopefully you can see the screen. David, if you could just give me a thumbs up reaction or video that the screen is sharing and you can see it.
Yep, you bet, Carson.
Awesome. Yeah, and I see Andre's there as well. So, all right. So again, thanks for joining, and we're at the start time. So let's get the evening underway. So you'll notice that you've been muted when you join the session. We're going to keep it that way just for most of the evening, just to avoid any background noise, any interruptions through some of the presentations. But we'll have specific times to answer, and at that point, we'll ask you to unmute yourself using some of the icons at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question that arises during any of the presentations, I ask that you use the chat function and then the raise your hand function. So as I'm going through the slides, if I see your hand raised, for example, I can unmute you. Myself or my colleague David will unmute you, and you can ask your question verbally. But feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them throughout the evening session as well. So. And then just ask that, yeah, you feel free to ask any questions that you want during the time, and we'll try to address them as I'm going through slides on the computer here. Sometimes it's a little difficult to see when a chat comes up on the Zoom function, but we'll do our best to address each question that arises, and I'll just ask you to be respectful and no inappropriate behavior will be tolerated tonight. So, with that, you'll notice you should have got a link with. Various materials for the evening, so a meeting package virtually. But I will ask, even though this is an information session, more than an actual quorum meeting, I'm still going to ask for a motion and a seconder to adopt the agenda. So if I could get somebody from the floor even to raise their hand. I see Andre and Alfred who have their videos on. So if you oppose to the agenda and you wanted something added, maybe use the reaction function to raise your hand. But I'll go with any opposed, call it the negative. And I think we're good here. So there'll be time throughout the evening for questions, and we'll get right underway here. So you'll notice the first thing up on the agenda is the financial review for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. So I'm going to walk through some of the kind of the high level overview of our financial position right now, and happy to take any questions after we get through a short slide deck here. So as a reminder of how your checkoff dollars work, so that $5.50 that comes off every animal that you sell, it's split into two major areas. So the $3 per head is related to the provincial checkoff. So it funds MBP or Manitoba Beef Producers specific activities within the province. So advocacy work, policy development, research, communications to the general public. This is really what that $3 per head funds from the checkoff dollar, and it is a refundable portion as opposed to the national checkoff. Through the provincial checkoff, we pay membership into groups like the Canadian Cattlemen's Association and the National Cattle Feeders Association to ensure that we're at the table for some of the important federal conversations that are happening, anything related to trade, advocacy work, animal health, lots of different files that we collaborate with our federal and provincial counterparts on with those memberships. The second portion, so that 250 per head, is the non-refundable federal portion, and it goes into three specific areas. The first one being Canada beef. So that's anything related to marketing and promotion of beef as a protein ingredient, both domestically and internationally. Second being Beef Research Council. So all the important extension and research and innovation that happens within the sector from a national perspective is funded through the beef. A lot of it is funded through Beef Cattle Research Council under National Checkoff umbrella. And then lastly, the public and stakeholder engagement. The public stakeholder engagement is relatively new underneath the whole National Checkoff and Checkoff realm. And in the last number of years, it was developed to be a group specifically tasked with trying to counteract some of the messaging that comes out from whether it's national chains using um, inappropriate messaging related to beef, counteracting some of the environmental messaging some of our competitors in the protein space may be using. That's really their task, is to focus on those efforts. That's I can see public stakeholder engagement is a really important group, and I can see it trending even more important over the next number of years here. So Myers Norris Penny did another audit for us. They've been our auditors for the last number of years. And through the 2020-2021 fiscal year, there's no materials concern found in the overall audit. A high level picture of what our year looked like from a financial standpoint was we had an estimated revenue of 1.56 million. Actual revenue came in at 1.87 million. We had estimated expenses of 1.6 million, an actual of just under 1.5 million, which effectively led to an excess of revenue over expenses of close to $300,000 within the organization. That is a fairly large excess over revenue, and the main reasoning behind this larger amount this year is the impacts of COVID-19 and our really decreased expenses that we were able to actually have as a result of the implications of COVID-19 and all the things shut down. So you'll see in some of the main expenses in a table in the future slides here of where that impacted overall at a high level. So in the 2020-2021 fiscal year, you'll see here that around close to 511,000 head were marketed, fairly close to the 5-year average, but a little down, and definitely down as in comparison to the previous fiscal year. We had 13.9% of producers choose to take back that provincial portion, that refundable checkoff dollar, or that $3 per head. We pay a dealer fee, so auction marts, groups like that collect the checkoff on our behalf. We pay them a small portion, and then that led to that net checkoff that was relatively close to the 5-year average within the organization. This table really lays out the main buckets where our expenses come from on a given year, and it's clear that a major impact from 2020-2021 fiscal year was the lack of meetings we were able to hold. You'll see that in the board meeting and director expenses as it relates to the average, substantially down there. Especially CCA fees, they vary depending on previous year's marketings, so they kind of go up and down depending on how many have been marketed. It was up further in the 2019-2021, but a little further down in the previous fiscal. But yeah, it just varies on marketings on a given year. Other memberships, that refers to things like the National Cattle Feeders Association, a really important group that we're happy to be a part of. Staff expenses, that's directly relates to not being able to go to any in-person meetings, not being able to go to any important, say, public relation events like Ag in the City or anything Ag in the Classroom may put on. Those important ones that staff really enjoy getting out to, as well as directors. Those were things that were pretty much curtailed as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. Office and rent, it's fairly fixed over the last number of years, and then salary and benefits. And we've had some staff turnover over the last number of years that's led this 5-year average, and as it relates to this past fiscal, go up and down. And yeah, so that'll vary on the needs of the organization. Now moving on to a quick breakdown of the national checkoff. So this is that $2.50 per head that I referenced in the beginning. these pie charts here really break down where the marketings and revenue come from across the country. It's clear here that currently most of that is or just about half of that, 49.55% is Alberta. They market the most animals in the country, followed by Saskatchewan, and Manitoba falls in, at least in the 21 marketings, at 6.63%. So, this is, and that's for this previous fiscal year, and we usually vary around that 6.5 to 10%. It'll depend on marketings in a given year, but that's usually our footprint within the sector, and it's still it's a really important part of the greater cattle industry across the country here. This bar graph here shows where each province chooses to allocate into those specific buckets underneath national checkoff. So Manitoba puts a substantial portion of our national checkoff dollars into marketing and promotion. So that's Canada beef. That's, as I said at the start, promoting protein ingredient of beef domestically and internationally. Really important for ensuring demand and from a trade perspective. Research would be second in our allocations to ensure there's innovation within the sector. We take a small portion, that little gray bar, back for provincial investment, and some other provinces do as well. Provincial investment with national checkoff means that you can invest those dollars into research or projects that would have greater benefit to the entire Canadian beef sector, not necessarily related to Manitoba work. So a lot of the projects that we may complete at MBFI and Brandon, for example, could be utilizing some of these national checkoff dollars, because it could have greater footprint for the entire industry, as opposed for using them directly related to, say, advocating at the legislature on certain policy within Manitoba. So dollars can't be used for those type of things. Some provinces take back some portions and some take back more than others. And it's something that Manitoba has done over the last few years. And then that little blue bar that you'll see at the top, that's that public stakeholder engagement group. And you kind of see within BC and Alberta, they have started to trend upwards in their commitment underneath that portfolio. And I can kind of see, after all the trends within the sector, that's going to become more and more important. And I could see PSE having a greater level of support in the years to come under national checkoff. So happy to answer any questions with the financial review. I know it's a bit of a short and sweet overview. And if you do have a question, remember there's the reaction tab at the bottom that will allow you to raise your hand, and then we'll look to unmute you, or ask to unmute you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions coming at this point. And if you want to use the chat function throughout the evening, if you think of a question as it relates to the financials or anything that I start talking about in the year in review here, please just type it in or use the reaction to raise your hand so we can get you unmuted. So I'm going to move on to the next portion of the agenda here, and which is the MVP year in review. So I'm going to cover off a lot of the things that MVP has been focused on over the last while. And Andre, you're my guinea pig. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can share that screen? Wonderful. Okay, so as I said, we're going to cover some of the main areas of focus over the last little while within the organization, and we'll be time at the end to answer any questions. And if you think of some during, please put them in the chat function. So a reminder of who MVP is. Manitoba Beef Producers. We're really the exclusive voice of the beef industry here in Manitoba. We have a board of 14 directors across the province. Currently have 4 staff and contract employees, and we're funded through those checkoff dollars that I covered in the financial portion of the report. And our main mission overall as an organization is to represent Manitoba beef producers through communication, research, advocacy, education, and leadership within the industry, to governments, and to the general public. So that's our overall mission as an organization. Our directors and staff, we really focus around kind of three main areas. And first one being telling our story. And this could relate to, ensuring we're telling our story to different levels of government, of the benefits of the beef industry within the agricultural sector, for society, for environmental purposes, all those hot button topics, and ensuring that beef sector is considered a champion in that area. That's really relates to all the telling our story aspect of our focus, and ensuring that we're coming up with enhanced communications and advocacy efforts to get the job done under that area. Next one is building our industry. So that really relates to innovation within the sector, ensuring that the industry is reinvesting in different research to drive competitiveness and profitability within the sector. And then last one is serving our members. So that really relates to ensuring that the organization has the skill set, both on the board and from a staff perspective, to be able to accomplish as much as we can for the sector here in Manitoba. And that's really the main areas that we focus on as an organization. So 2020, I saw many of you last year at our virtual, whether it was district meetings or full AGM that we had to resort to as a result of that AGM. So I'm just going to take a little bit of a step back into 2020 again and talk about the main focus of that year, and it was really COVID-19. I think every industry across the globe was impacted by this, and the beef industry was no exception. I think the main issues that we saw from the onset of the pandemic was supply chain and its impact on some of the major plants. We saw many public health outbreaks as a result of the virus at some of the major plants in Canada and the US that impacted the North American supply chains within the beef sector, and caused a lot of concern about animals backing up. And that was really the major focus of last year. We saw sporadic outbreaks after the onset, but I think a lot of the larger organizations and plants were able to come up with pretty good protocols to try to at least avoid some of the more detrimental impacts to staff and supply chain issues. But it was still a thing that was impacted throughout the summer months and into the fall. And I think there's just the ever feeling ramifications of supply chain issues in the sector. Maybe not necessarily just related to movement of cattle, but we've seen it anywhere from materials for fencing, sometimes being trouble to source, all the way up to veterinary products being having supply chain issues. So those are the main areas of impact really last year on the sector as a result of COVID-19. For MBP's perspective, it really changed how we were able to do things. And you saw that in the financial summary, we weren't able to meet in person. Since our new board came on, we've had 2 in-person board meetings when we usually would probably have 9 or 10 in a given year. So that's a substantial decrease, but I will give credit to all the directors for our ability to switch to the Zoom platform because we've still been able to accomplish a lot in the meantime. But it impacted how government staff can do things as well. So we weren't able to meet them in person, couldn't go into the legislature for a advocacy efforts or go to Ottawa for fly-ins. It was all virtual focused. And same with any of our public facing events that we like to take part in. Those were all either held virtually or completely closed up. So those are the main focus. And the main focus of MVP last year, and some of you may recall of me discussing this at our virtual district meetings and AGM. But this year's focus is severely dominated by the devastating drought that the industry experienced in this year. We knew that when there was effectively no snow across the province, there was going to be no major runoff. So moisture levels were already low and were bound to be even lower as we started the production year, or I guess the growing season, you could call it, for forages and grain. Some of the areas in the province, this was a compounding factor. Areas such as the Inner Lake have faced successive years of drought-like conditions, so it was going to be an even more of a struggle in some of those areas. So we really started to outreach to government very early in the spring, and we looked for different avenues for assistance. First one, they're listed here, and I'll go into more detail in the upcoming slides. But water source development, feed sourcing, opening up lands for haying and grazing, drought extension, ensuring that there's the proper knowledge being delivered to producers on using alternative feeds, for example, livestock tax deferral provision, anything related to BRMs that producers could utilize to get through the rough times, and then agri recovery. And agri recovery is something I'll touch on as well in the coming slides. So when we started when it came in about March, April timeframe, and we knew there was no snow at that point, or there would have been sporadic snow in the province, but there wasn't going to be much runoff to fill some of these dugouts. This is the main worry we had originally, and it was water availability. We didn't move to feed quite yet because we felt if there was potential for really timely rains or some good spring rains, some of that feed growth and forage growth would have bounced back from the deficit in soil moisture. But this image really was seen across the province in the low dugouts, and it was going to impact producers' ability to get water to their animals and impact their ability to utilize pasture as well. Because some areas you could have had the grass, but if you had no water, you might have not had the option unless you could haul water in, which we know happened. So the main focus that MVP drove for was to go at avenues that we knew could be opened up fairly swiftly as support avenues from government. First, the main one in terms of water source development was the best management practice 503 called Managing Livestock Access to Riparian Areas. This is under the Ag Action Manitoba program for farmers from the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which is a cost share between the federal and provincial government. And it's a program to help with water source development, such as wells and dugouts, which we knew was really important. And in early November, the department said they had about 450 applications effectively approved, or close to, which is really good intake. And I think a lot of producers were able to see support from that program. So that was a really important one off the get-go, because we knew it was an avenue that they could open up. And then once that that was opened up and we saw folks taking advantage of that program, we got into later spring and the rain still hadn't come, and that's really when the shift of focus from our organization focused to gaining access to alternative feeds, getting anything and everything that producers could scrounge up and to support their feedstocks, whether they had to supplement early on pasture or the pending winter coming up here to get their main breeding herd through that, because that was folks were starting to see the writing on the wall and they needed to start sourcing at that point. And the rains, the drought that was so widespread from Northwest Ontario all the way to BC, it was so disastrous that it wasn't just the cattle sector that was being impacted by the drought, but we saw the grain industry really seeing just poor crops. And that's really why we join forces with various agricultural groups within the province, Keystone Agriculture Producers, Manitoba Forage and Grassland, and the department, as well as MASC, to come up with ways that we could encourage some of these poor crops, these poor grain crops, to start and shift it over to alternative use, so that a cattle guy could get access to that important feed that he was in desire of when he had nothing on pasture. So MASC did apply an important quality adjustment factor to in-field appraisals for the grain industry, which if a grain producer got an in-field appraisal and then agreed to utilize that as alternative feed use and put that into the cattle sector or the livestock sector, they would receive a 40% discount off their appraisal. So effectively get a bit more of a payout with their agri insurance or their crop insurance. So this was the kind of the carrot to ensure that if producers saw that as a benefit and they didn't think that their grain crop was going to amount to much yield, but still looked like a good green feed option or silage or even grazing for the cattlemen out there, cattlemen and women, it was a beneficial change. And they did that originally with cereal crops, and then a number of weeks later they applied this to the corn crop across the province as well. And this one, I know just from a personal standpoint, was able to be utilized by some folks in the beef sector. Um, some some family had some poor looking grain corn, and they were able to get that off to some cattlemen in need, which was great to see, because we knew that forage availability or feed availability was short and lacking across the whole West. Other changes MASC made, you made the advance payments on forage claims, which was beneficial for folks that had forage policies. They allowed livestock grazing on low yield forage fields, or after that first cut, without that graze production counting against their forage claim. They also triggered a hay disaster benefit, would provided an extra $44 a ton for every ton below your coverage level. So again, it helped this initial quick change, help folks that have had forage insurance policies. This one in particular usually isn't triggered or initialized until about January so it'd be this January 2022, but they were able to trigger it in the summer because they saw the disaster situation. So it's just another avenue for government to get dollars into the hands of producers that needed it. Hay West, that was another feed sourcing project that was mainly led by the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, with support from different organizations such as ourselves across the West here. In the early 2000s, there was a Hay West program that effectively was Eastern producers donated a bunch of hay and got her shipped out here for producers to pick up. This one under CFA was more of a donation for sale at a reasonable price. It was 10 cents per ton delivered for some of the hay coming in. I believe that website, if you want to write it down, is still live if folks were interested in taking a look and filling out an application. It's probably, I'm not sure how much longer CFA will have it up in terms of donations for sale out east, but it's still a good news story. And I know folks in the Interlake, for example, how we're able to gain access to some of this feed. And I hope that some more feed over the last number of weeks has moved, because it was the east saw our record yields when west was seeing really poor ones. So it's good that some of that stuff moved to help us out. BRM programs have been a focus of MVP for quite a while. Business risk management tools. Agri stability, there were some changes announced in the middle of the drought period that were beneficial if folks were looking to get involved or were already involved. They increased the interim payment rate from 50% to 75%, and they provided late participation with a bit of a penalty applied to it. So this program has been, hit and miss for producers, in particular in the cow-calf sector, over the last number of years, and we're well aware of some of the concerns that folks have with agri stability. But one of the changes that was made last year, in theory, through multiple analysis with our MNP partners, this removal of the reference margin limit that was implemented a number of years ago in the agri stability program. This removal of it is supposed to make it a more equitable program for the cow-calf sector. So just to simplify it, on the call here, with the reference margin limit in place, a producer would need to have lost as well over 50% of their margin. So it was a huge hit they would have needed to take to even start to see any sort of payment from the program. So it really made the program not equitable at all, and made not much sense to buy in and pay the premium associated with being involved in the program, or the registration fee. But with this removal, it really means, in simple terms, that you won't have to lose as much of your margin to effectively start seeing payment. So it's supposed to be more reactive for the cow-calf sector without the reference margin limit, and actually do what it's needed to do, as opposed to having to lose so much before it even is a disaster program at all. So hopefully hopefully producers had looked at this, and then yeah, like I said, in a lot of the theory that we've looked over and supported from CCA's efforts federally to remove this, um, show benefit from this program moving forward. Livestock tax deferral. This is one that was announced in the summer as well as a support tool for producers to utilize for the drought. It allows producers in the designated areas, and the designated areas this year was effectively the whole production end of the province, so the whole south. It allows anyone that had to sell a significant amount of their breeding herd to offset that resulting revenue into future years, to effectively defer that income, so you're not taking as much of a tax burden on it. This one is seen as beneficial, but the industry's still lobbying for some adjustments and tweaks to this program to make it more of a important program for producers moving forward. And one of the lobby efforts federally, because this would take a CRA tax change, as well as support from the agricultural sector, is adding more classes of cattle, such as backgrounders, grassers, some of those ones that people were probably forced to sell this year due to drought when they normally wouldn't have, and they're going to have basically taken up way more, or taking in way more income as it relates to expenses, and they're going to be hit with substantial more taxes. So if to get more classes added, that would be of benefit, something we've been lobbying for a while, and extending it over multiple years, because this drought has had impacts, and to defer some of that income that was brought in due to forced sale is a positive, and something that we try to lobby for on a federal scale. But moving on now to Agri Recovery initiatives. I think this is really where the main focus was, because we knew this is the main framework in which dollars can be put towards. So countless hours was spent by either with board meetings, staff are working with Canadian Cattlemen's Association and our provincial counterparts at the various cattle associations impacted by drought, to try to advocate for financial assistance under Agri Recovery. So when the drought was at its worst, we were able to have Mary Claude Bibeau, the federal agriculture minister, out to Mike Duguid, District 10 director with MVP, to tour the area and see firsthand the devastation that the drought was causing. And that's the picture there with Mike, Tyler, our chair, and the minister standing in one of Mike's pastures. And I have to say, this one, as well as other engagement with some MPs and MLAs at various times throughout the drought, and when the drought was at its peak, was really what I feel moved the needle for seeing federal support dollars committed, and then provincial dollars committed as well. I think it really helped drive home the devastation and emotions that producers were feeling. And I'm happy to see that dollars were committed, and it wasn't just pushed to the side where sometimes it has been in the past, because it was just so devastating. So I really think those hours spent to get that image in front of the different policy and different decision makers was really important. So just so folks are kind of aligned on the areas of Agri Recovery and drought related, which MPP really advocated for when we knew there could be potential funding coming down the pipe. We advocated for a per head payment, similar to what other provincial governments have provided. We felt it would have been the best avenue to provide support to producers, and recognizing producers incurred a lot of different extraordinary costs as a result of the drought. Feed costs is one of them, water hauling, cutting ditches, doing a lot more labor than they normally would have, making all sorts of decisions on their operation. And that's just to name a few, right? So that's why we felt the per head payment would have been the best. We also recommended a herd recovery plan be put under the Agri Recovery framework, recognizing that Manitoba was a number of weeks ahead of other provinces in the drought in terms of conditions. So we were about 2 to 3 weeks ahead, we feel, in how things were going in terms of pasture conditions and water availability and feed availability. So people were making sell-off decisions a lot earlier than they saw in other provinces. So we felt like if there's a way that we can recognize the extreme call that's happened, extreme downsizing, and if producers were seeking to re-enter, there would be this second prong of a two-prong approach to provide support. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. Also sought assistance for infrastructure requirements. A lot of producers looking to either haul or source water, ensuring that there's retroactivity. That was a main ask to account for some of the costs and decisions that producers made earlier on as they saw the writing on the wall. Forage restoration program we feel is something that could be separate and from an agri recovery standpoint, but it will be important moving forward to help some of these forage stands or some of these pasture stands bounce back from the devastating drought impacts. We advocate and we continue to advocate specifically to the agricultural crown lands area on rental rate freezes or adjustments to the rental rate as a result of the drought, because of those drastic increase we saw the last couple of years. It's really a stepping stone we feel to adjust or provide some sort of recognition that the drought is impacting these producers as any way there can be a freeze. So it's something we continue to advocate for, and it was one of our asks for underneath the drought assistance file. Financial assistance for feed testing and water source testing. Those are really important, and part of that's covered under Agri Recovery that I'll talk about, and then things like interest only payments on MSC loans, and those are just to cover some of it. So those were our overall asks as an organization to simplify down the asks. Now I'm going to cover what the decision that the department went with to provide support for producers, and cover some of those details as we understand it, and and we'll continue on. So the two key programs initially announced here, first one being Livestock Feed and Transportation Drought Assistance Program. This is to help producers purchase and test feed for livestock to maintain their herds over the winter months, as well as including allowing some assistance for any of that feed that they had to transport over a longer distance than normal. There's also the Livestock Transportation Drought Assistance Program. This is offer assistance if folks wanted to move their animals off site to, say, a custom lot or something that had an area that had more feed. Support would be provided to ship those animals to that location. From an eligibility perspective, primary producers that have owned these animals or leased them in Manitoba as of June 1, 2022 was really a high level eligibility for it. Needed to be for the breeding herd, as that was the desire of the program, is to help maintain the breeding herd in the province. It's for a variety of species, and obviously the important one here is beef. And producers must have had at least a minimum of 10 animals, because really the focus of the program was to be the production end of agriculture, and not for somebody that had 2 or 3 cows in their backyard to provide support. So that's really the high level eligibility of the program. So more specific on the feed assistance portion, this was aid in expenses that were incurred from June 1st to March 15th of this coming spring. Such as winter feed purchased for those eligible breeding animals that you declare, and the feed testing associated with it, which we strongly encourage. If you are getting any alternative feed, there could be some anti-nutritionals associated with it, and encourage that you take up that feed testing support. So any costs associated with that are eligible. It's for feed consumed over the winter period, and eligible feeds that can be purchased to maintain those breeding animals are grazed corn and green feed, mechanically harvested hay, silage, green feed, stover, and those including those purchased as standing crops or graze in the swath, as well as grain and concentrates, commercially prepared pellets, DDGs, soybean meal, canola meal, and complete feed. For the feed transportation component of it, this is to transport some of the hay over a minimum of 40 kilometers and up to a maximum of 600 kilometers between those dates up on the screen. It kind of went with the hay component of it. It went in these following rates. So it's 16 cents per ton kilometer for the first 100K, and then 10 cents per ton for the remainder of the haul up to for the additional 500. And then grain and concentrates were on just a flat rate all the way up to 600 kilometers. So Agri Recovery works on a per head basis, but there is an initial producer share. So a share of $50 per head is applied to 2-year claim, and then anything up to $250 per head. Sorry. For those feed purchases would be covered, and it needs to be supported by invoices and receipts, and some proof of purchases and some of the other details that you can find in the program application to be eligible for the program. So I made this simple 100 head operation for the virtual session here tonight, just to kind of see how I interpreted it, but and how I've been kind of explaining it. So if you had a $30,000 feed bill, for example, and you had a 100 head operation, that first producer share is the 100 head times 50, which is 5,000. Added too many zeros there. Whoops. So $5,000 would be producer share, and then anything up to the $250 times 100 animals would be covered under Agri Recovery. So that's 25,000 here, and then following that maximum of 250 per animal, it's back to producer covered. So I whipped that up just recently, so I butchered some of the numbers in there, but hopefully that made a bit of sense. Really, that first little portion covered by producer. Then there's the opportunity for producers to get all the way up until 250 per head, and then there's the 500 piece. I see Sarah, you have a question, and I'm going to actually ask you to unmute because it's probably related to the program here.
It's actually Matthew. I'm thinking the $250, you'd have to spend much more than that, right? Because you're only eligible for 75% of the cost. So if you submitted a $10,000 invoice, even after your first initial $50, you'd be eligible for $7,500 worth of payment. Correct?
Yeah, there is that 75% that's in there. But there's the potential to max out at I guess 250. So yeah, maybe my calculations weren't quite correct there, but you'd have to spend a bit more than just that 200 or 25,000 plus.
You'd have to spend to get $250, you have to spend about $335, something like that.
Yep. Yeah. So minus, yeah, you're right. I appreciate that actually you clarifying that for us, because one of the great examples that I do reference at the end, and what we're pushing producers to go look at is Carlisle Bennett did one in a webinar that really explains it quite well, to that effect. So that one's posted on our website if folks are interested in checking that out. But it's a good clarification there. But really, that first little the piece people need to take home is there's a little producer share that's covered off the start, but there is a potential to get a maximum of 250. It just depends on what you spent on feed. Currently, and I think I will just raise are you good, Matthew? Okay, so currently the ineligible expenses under the program are listed here. So the first one is it can't be for feed for market animals or ineligible animals. So it's mainly for that breeding herd. That's really the overall initial desire of the program. Can't be feed producer in your own operation. So this is one that we're working on with the department and providing feedback and having more advocacy discussions to try to get this particular one opened up a little bit, because currently the eligibility criteria supports producers that purchased externally, but there was a lot of producers across the landscape that made a lot of decisions to cut ditches, as I said, had a lot of extraordinary costs, hauled water that could be included underneath the program as a terms of a eligible expense, but currently aren't. So we feel if we can make some adjustments after seeing how much uptake there is in the program to allow producers to gain access to the program, this would be beneficial to ensure that the dollars are utilized for the need within the province, because there's a lot of extraordinary costs that happen that maybe isn't just purchasing feed externally. So if we can get some opening up of eligible criteria, even a little bit of tweaking to allow producers to claim more to get over that $50 per head, for example, that would provide support. It needs to be for those, yeah, so that feed for the breeding animals that are sold can't be for those prior to March 15th. So it's for animals that you've kept till March 15th. Can't be for feed that is sold and replaces similar feed. So it's not, we're not buying grain and selling it a higher amount and then buying more in and getting the benefit. Feed transported less than 40 kilometers. That's the minimum distance that was decided by the department, and you can't claim support from shipping animals to an alternative feeding location and also claim support for shipping that feed to that alternative feeding location. You can get support for the feed cost, but it's not, you can't get double support of shipping it there and your animals. That's another piece that is ineligible underneath the program. So how to apply? We encourage you to reach out to the department, the MASC service centers, call the number on here to get applications. Really encourage you to start putting, receipts in to basically get an account set up with underneath the program and continue to put in applications or receipts to start getting over the producer share and start seeing support underneath the program. As this program, the application deadline goes till April 15th of 2022. And as I said, great example of how it's laid out, better than I did it there, is on the webinar on our website, because Carlisle Bennett did. He did an excellent job explaining the current details of the program. So lastly, as it relates to Agri Recovery, and then I'm going to look at some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. Well, some producers had to downsize or liquidate a substantial amount of their herds, and that's really relates to this second prong approach. And that's a herd rebuilding program. We're still waiting on details to be announced from the department, but initial discussions are, if you had to sell over a greater amount than your normal cull rate or than a normal cull rate, there may be some financial support to either retain or buy back in. So that's the general theory of the program, and we're just patiently waiting as best we can to get some details. And I do thank folks on the call, I think from the department that are working on this, and we just need to get it across the finish line so producers know what their options may be. So I'm just gonna, before this, seeing as this, I see some questions coming in on the chat. I want to ensure that I read some of the comments coming in. Sorry, Charlene, for my voice cutting in and out. Hopefully it's clear to other folks. Okay. Yeah, so there is some definite gaps, that need to, potentially look at, and that's the challenge with, if a receipt-based program is, it depends on the type of operation that you have. You might fall through some of the support cracks. And I just see that Kevin Stocky's last comment, payment was super quick, and I also will agree with that as well. That and commend the department for getting some of these checks out the door already, because though we'd like to see some adjustments to open it up for some of the producers that may be falling through the cracks, but we're still detrimentally impacted by the program. It's good to see that checks are flowing as quickly as it can, which is pretty amazing from an Agri Recovery or program perspective, when sometimes we just see delays from this. So it's good. Yeah, and Charlene, that your comment as it relates to supplementing on top of some of your slew hay and native hay, it's something that we've asked for um, from the department to include in their eligible expenses as well. So it's something we'll continue to bring forward over the next number of weeks here. So if there is any opening of that to ensure that the program is being utilized, um, keep an eye out on our social media and website and our various other channels, because we'll ensure to, because the department's been very open to make adjustments from the get-go. It just it just takes a bit of discussion to ensure this to happen. So just keep an eye on things. I can't promise that a supplement such as the liquid protein feed protein on top of a bale mix would be, but I see the justification for it, and maybe there is justification to ensure that the program is being used. Okay, so we're going to move on the slide deck, and again, chat. Feel free to send questions into the chat, and we'll have more time for folks to raise their hand later on in the agenda. So livestock price insurance, this particular program has been seen as beneficial by many producers across the West, because it is a Western livestock program. It used to be called Western Livestock Price Insurance. Now it's called LPI. So they made a bit of a name change. Feeder and fed programs, they're open year round, but they did make a change this year to the settlement windows for cow-calf producers that was beneficial. They usually the deadline's end of May, but they opened it up from as early as February right up into June 10th. So folks that do utilize this program saw this as beneficial. Now just moving on to a bunch of the different advocacy work that MVP is involved in. Back to the agricultural crown lands focus. I think this is a constant piece that our board is looking at ways to advocate for, as it's been such a challenge for many producers when some of the new regulations came into place, and it's something that we continue to advocate for, especially when we have the opportunity to meet with with the ag minister as it relates to it, and it's Minister Eichler back in place now, and with new leadership in the province, I have some optimism to be able to advocate for these main areas. The areas that we continue to focus on over the last number of years and will continue to bring forward, especially with new leadership within the province, is some adjustments to the rental rate increase, or some recognition that had gone up quite quick. We asked for a 5-year transition at least, and that wasn't provided at this point. So there's some sort of recognition from that drastic increase would be beneficial. The continuation of unit transfers, I think this is a really important one. For crown land leaseholders and for the continuation of the sector in some of those areas. I think it's an important piece that could be brought back into play, and we'll continue to bring that forward with new leadership, adjustments to the auction process. So the first auction was in person, then COVID hit, and then they went to a virtual session, and there's some concerns brought up as it relates to that process, such as transparency issues with an online format. So if they're going to continue, say, with an online format, there needs to be some openings in terms of transparency there. Better way to value leaseholder improvements, especially if unit transfer weren't put back into place. This one will be really important for producers to ensure that they're getting back what they're putting in, or at least some of that value. Addressing concerns relating to enforcement. This has just been a long-term concern with the agricultural crown lands, even before regulations, because enforcement is a challenge, and we see constant decrease in staffing support underneath this portfolio. So hopefully the department is making some changes to this, so ensure that things are enforced properly and the land's being utilized as it should be. Informed access is something that has been brought up for many years over many different governments, and it's something that continue to bring forward, especially with some recent trespassing changes related to biosecurity, to at least allow people wanting to use this from a recreational standpoint, ATVing, hunting, what have you, to have to inform the leaseholder that they're going to be utilizing that land. for the safety of themselves and for the safety of the animals involved. So it's an important important piece they've been pushing for quite some time. And then recognizing ecosystem goods and services on that land. And there's, this one's really important because a lot of producers, they're the main caretakers of these crown lands, is public land. And without them there, it's hard to, you don't know how this land would go out, but I bet you many of you could guess. So that's need to recognize all the things that they provide to the landscape. Livestock Predation project, I'm not going to touch on this besides that, Ray Bittner has led this project and we'll be providing you a video update on later on the agenda. Update to transportation regulations. So as you recall, a couple of years ago from district meetings, there's going to be, or there is been some changes implemented in transport regulations federally for livestock transport, specifically as it relates to feed, water, and rest. So they were brought in February 20th of 2022 as a result of a long public consultation that had, a large amount of general public input that influenced some of these decisions that were being made. So when the industry saw what was happening, we did our best to lobby for it to be, the decision to be made the other way. But seeing as a lot of the research wasn't completed that was being conducted on animal transport by Ag Canada and by in conjunction with the industry, it just they never made the decision to revert their plans for feed, water, and rest requirements. So it came into place February 20th. However, current ag minister decided to delay enforcement until 2022 until they can further look at the data that's being provided. One of the asks that the industry is putting forward now to the reformed ag minister, so Mary Clobie Bow is back in that seat after the federal election, is to try to get an extension again from enforcement if the data isn't fully, brought in front of some of the decision makers on this particular change. Because if it's not, if the science isn't in front of them, at least enforcement should be delayed. So producers aren't and transporters aren't being penalized for this animal welfare piece that may in fact, and I think we know the industry knows the proper outcomes from an animal welfare standpoint, but yeah, so that's why this enforcement would be beneficial to at least allow us more time to try to make decision makers have a more informed decision. As a reminder what those changes were. So currently what is being enforced is animals can be on truck for a maximum of 48 hours. So that's important for some of our long distance hauls, especially out east. But with the changes coming into place, it's only a maximum of 36 hours without feed, water, and rest. So there's a pretty big buffer window in there to be that they can be on the truck, and rest period is increased to from 5 hours to 8 hours. So just to simplify it down, these regulations mean that animals can't be on the truck as long, and they have to be off the truck for longer. So the challenge with this one, as I said at the start, is it's always been influenced by one of the biggest public consultations that Ag Canada, the federal government, have seen, especially as it relates to agriculture. But it's up there with one of the biggest inputs from the general public. So it really influenced, I think, some of the decisions to go this route. But all of producers on the line and anybody involved in the sector know that the more you have to unload them, the more you're handling them, the more there's could be potential for injury. And then if you're commingling them at some of these offsite stations that they're setting up in between some of the major hauls, it's just could be a biosecurity nightmare as well. So there's a lot of challenges associated with it. And one thing that an analogy that I like to tell here on the line or at these different district meetings that really stuck with me, and it's actually something that's if you're ever talking with MPs or MLAs about the program, and we bring it up in Ottawa a lot with this analogy, because some of the MPs that would potentially have decision power on some of these don't have an agricultural background. So we just equated to, if you were going on a long distance flight, would you rather have a direct flight or have to have a connection? And it kind of makes the the case a little more easily able to digest. So it's something we'll continue to advocate for on from a transportation standpoint. Traceability, movement reporting, expected to see some traceability requirements in the sector, and we were expected to see these in 2020, and then, or at least some consultations or more details for it, and then COVID hit, and CFIA has been very transparent to say that this has fallen on the back burner, and it's really not been the area of focus for them with CFIA, and have been much to the other priorities coming up. So we haven't seen any details or anything that we can provide feedback on or consultation on. But when we hear details, we'll be sure to ensure that we get some feedback from membership. BSA negligible risk status. This was an important declaration that Canada got, and it'll be talked about a bit more in some of the CCA video that I'll be playing later on the agenda. But it is a really important development for the sector, because it provides a lot more opportunities from an international trade perspective. So as we felt the impacts of BSE and the overshadowing impacts of BSE since it came into place, and the fact that we've finally been declared in a negligible risk status, that's really important. Now to get into certain other areas of advocacy work that MBP works on, provided support and consultative feedback on things like the Petty Trespassers Act, the Occupiers Liability Act, Animal Diseases Act, which were implemented in October. This change included improvements to trespassing and biosecurity laws aimed at protecting animals, people, farms, and real properties. So, for example, the changes really remove the need to confront trespassers where possible by making entry onto specified premises without permission an offense, unless the person has a lawful excuse to do so. So this one in particular is really important for the monogastric sector, such as swine and chickens, because they have strict biosecurity zones. But we know in the beef sector too, it's important to maintain that biosecurity zone as well. So at least having some of these changes remove the need to confront trespassers and get some support, as it would be considered an offense. Providing lots of feedback and environmental consultations, everything from agricultural plastics to Lake Winnipeg nutrient targets to water management strategy that the provincial government will probably be even ramping up even further with our current water conditions in the province, and other things like species at risk consultations and things related to Environment Canada and greenhouse gas offset programs, which is could be a potential avenue for a revenue stream for producers moving forward, especially with all the the focus from all levels of government on climate change and offsets and all the discussions you probably heard in the media. I think there could be an avenue there for producers that manage some of the important grasslands ecosystems across the province. So other consultations, such as we take part in things like Manitoba Agriculture's public trust survey and things that they're looking to do moving forward to improve public trust of the sector. Next policy framework will be a major focus between now and 2023, because both levels of government from a provincial and federal standpoint are looking to get a new policy framework developed. They're currently in consultations right now and in the development stage with input from the industry. So we'll ensure that we provide the beef sector priorities in on that to ensure that any programs developed, or like say BRM programs or environmental supports or research underneath the agricultural policy framework, which is currently called the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, considers the beef sector. So it's part of those conversations. Manitoba Protein Advantage, they've been focused on that for the last number of years. and then various meetings with elected officials over the last year and a bit. And, this picture on the bottom of the screen really illustrates the silver lining of the COVID-19 pandemic is we were really able to adjust quite well to utilizing, whether it was Teams or Zoom or whatever virtual medium you want that you're aware of, to have a lot of these different fly-ins and virtual conversations with MPs and MLAs, some from that are tough to access, especially if you're in Ottawa and they're usually their schedule's pretty full. So being able to just jump on a 15 to half an hour conversation on it in a Teams call or a Zoom call is actually quite beneficial, as opposed to potentially having your meeting canceled when you go to Ottawa. It helps from a fly-in perspective. So that was seen as beneficial. Lots of consultations provided on a federal scale. We're always providing different sorts of feedback into the long consultation that CFIA has been conducting as it relates to feed regulation updates, collaborating with our national counterparts, Canadian Cattlemen's, national cattle feeders on various important policy initiatives, and constantly in discussion with MASC on their various offerings to producers to ensure that that suite of BRM programs is workable, and from anything from coverage on silage, corn to predation, compensation. So lots covered usually in our discussion with MASC. Now on to the communication side of things. The main thing I like to talk about here is the great effort that MVP and all our directors put in the summer months. And between January 1st and October 14th, we had 176 digital print stories, television spots, blog posts, radio, mostly related to the drought. And folks like, Andre, who you can probably see on the screen, or Andre Stepler, one of our directors, who did a lot of great interviews to really drive home the devastating impact that the drought has had. And, things like our president, Tyler Fulton, taking part in media stories all the way up to the New York Times to talk about the drought. I really feel it moved the needle to see financial support under Agri Recovery, because initially we made both many levels of government and decision makers within the various caucuses and what have you maybe didn't know what the desire, the disastrous impact that producers were seeing as a result of the drought. And having the ability to get in front in these multiple coordinated media stories was really well done, and I think it helped move the needle. And I always like to thank our communications lead, David Halton, for everything he did in helping coordinate these important media stories as well, to get the message out there about the drought. Like to take part in fun initiatives as well in the communications file. Probably more related to a lot of them related to recipes, with beef as a protein ingredients. We did some fun ones in the summer months with Brandon Bounce Radio, featuring different burger recipes, for example, with a popular host there from the radio station. We also did do things with QX 104 here in Winnipeg. For example, QX Nations Cooks. This was a Facebook Live event where the co-hosts were able to cook with a couple winners that won a radio contest, and our food expert, who's in the top right here, Tamara Sarkeesian, and that was a really well received program put on by QX 104. We are heavily involved with Great Taste in Manitoba. Over the last number of years, it just aired its 32nd season, which featured Tamara talking about some great recipes. It also had a field to plate story that featured the Platt family from Stead, Manitoba, and greatly thank them for taking part in that great video. And it also had MHHC past CEO Tim Sopuck talking about the benefits of beef and the environment and the habitat support that beef animals provide on the landscape. And it was good to come from that message, to come from somebody as important and influential as Tim. So thanks to him for all the efforts that he provided there. Also did some other fun and informative, more commercial style communications. Andre and his family out near Miami, Manitoba, were able to develop a fields to fork story, connecting beef and the environment. Again, that message that is really important for our sector. And it's yeah, I think it was really well received, and got a lot of positive feedback on that from not just folks that I see in my circles that know everything that you need to know about the beef industry, but any of the more urban centered friends that I have in my circle really found that commercial quite good. So, and it was aired on CTV Morning Live for the most part, with smatterings throughout CTV programming. So that one was really well done, and thanks to Stepler family for that. And we are involved in various other activities, some related to conservation efforts, through our SARPAL programming, which is funded through Environment Canada, Conservation Trust put on through MHHC. And we do some grassland and habitat work, provide support to producers through that. Ag in the Classroom, proud partner of that organization that does phenomenal work for rural and urban schools to get the message of agriculture in there, to ensure it's front and center. Great work being done at MBFI by Dr. Mary Jane Orr, who's the lead there, and she does phenomenal work with a bunch of different extension and research activities happening. Yeah, so if I'll talk on that and a potential ask from her in the next slide here. And then Fort White Alive is a recent example of some of the great relationships that we can develop within the conservation space to improve the environmental message of the beef sector. So Fort White's a kind of nature focused hiking area within Winnipeg, and a connection made through MFGA allowed us to connect with some of the leadership within Fort White to help revamp their soil diorama, to have some beef messaging, and the importance of soil health that the beef industry does provide, and maintenance of grasslands and all that good messaging that we do talk about as an industry, and put that up on that soil diorama, as well as they have a bison herd there that that folks are able to walk by and read on the hiking signs all the information about how bison maintain the native prairie for years and years and years, generations before agriculture came in. And we're gonna try to get a sign up right beside the bison herd sign that says, to simplify it, to the effect of, yes, bison did used to maintain this native grassland habitat, but the reality is it's the beef sector that does it now. And without the beef sector, a lot of this stuff would be chewed up, torn up, and sold off for for commodity crops. For and I think we could see that happen at a great rate, just with $20 canola. So those are some of the other areas of focus. There is an open call for on-farm testing ideas and innovation for research collaboration MBFI. Mary Jane, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you want to I think you're on, and then maybe you can make just a brief comment on this. So just give me a second. See you there, Mary Jane.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, this is just a pitch while I have a captive audience, just to promote that we just wrapped up our 6th field season. And so for a lot of the on-farm demonstration that has been held at MBFI, it was the first year, 3 years ran through, and then they're just wrapping up a lot of projects for 3-year projects. And so we have this wide open opportunity to really incorporate ideas from producers as much as possible over the coming months, so we can integrate these ideas and layer as many different concepts as we can into the acres that we have, so we can make sure we're being impactful as possible. So leading into winter, we're going to be wrapping up and communicating on all the work that has been done previously. And then heading into the 2022 field season, we'll be looking at having some some revisions and seeing new work or addressing new questions and taking questions a couple steps further that we have on the work that we've been doing. So just roughly some ideas just to get you thinking would be, are there grazing practices specifically you're interested in? Solutions to improve pastures, annual or perennial forages that you'd like to see demoed, any kind of work that we can be doing on soil health or work that we can do to build our resilience to climate, either in the wet cycle or the dry cycle, and then also any new technologies or products. So I have on their website, if you go to project ideas, you can just fill form some information to me. But you can also just directly email me at information@mbfi.ca or just give me a call at 204-761-3300 in tiny print down the bottom of the picture there. But thank you for the time, Carson. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mary Jane, for all the efforts that you provide at MBFI that benefits the industry, and hopefully some people reach out to you with some ideas here. Okay, so with that, I want to leave it with, in terms of the year in review, with, I greatly appreciate all the, calls and feedback that, we got into and supportive feedback that we got into the office here through our directors as we were working through the drought. I think it was a challenging time for so many, and there was such great support to try to come up with ways to move the needle here. And though we're still got some work to do as it relates to it, I think there has been some benefit from it. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. And it's just, we're your organization. We need to hear from you, and there's various avenues that you can take to reach out to us. Feel free to just call us at the office and have a discussion with us on what you're seeing on the landscape. So ensure that you subscribe to our various social media, e-newsletter, Cattle Country, to keep up to date with what we're working on and what's going on that could be important to you. Drop us an email at our info line. That's always appreciated, or contact your director, as I said. So with that, I'm going to get back to some a couple of the questions here in the chat box, and then happy to answer any verbal questions as it relates to the year in review. And just ask that you just raise your hand. So one thing that I see from Charlene here and I'll read out the question out loud, is that the provincial government good reason as to why they would not provide a per head payment program when that was something MVP was asking for, and in my opinion would have benefited all producers equally. Yeah, and it's something we definitely pushed for from the get-go, because and I had insight on how other provinces impacted by drought were approaching it as well, and the feedback that we got on why the province didn't go on this route was that not all producers were impacted as badly by the drought, and there were certain areas that were more detrimental than others. And they felt like those producers should ensure that they get support, especially if they had to purchase external feed, in case dollars were an issue. And I think that was the main justification that we were given by the department. I appreciate, Andre, you jump in and addressing a few of the the comments as it relates to herd rebuild. No details that we can really that have been publicly shared as of yet, but hopefully something comes out in the coming days with more information for producers to look at. And appreciate the other comments being brought up here, and agree with some of the answers that Andre provided in the chat function. So okay, any other questions for the year in review? Okay, so we'll move on the agenda here. So I'm going to play a video update from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and we'll get that started here right now. So give me a quick moment. So in terms of time on the meeting and time on the agenda, what I've been doing actually the last little while is just playing 15 minutes of it tonight, because it is a full half an hour video, and then then we'll post it on the website separately after this meeting. If you feel like watching the other half, some of the pieces that um, I've talked about already in my presentation are covered, but there might be some other interesting pieces you might want to look at your leisure. So that'll be the plan. So once we get halfway through this video, after Fawn's discussion, we'll move on the agenda just to keep us on pace here. So I'm just gonna look to share my screen.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Lowe. I'm president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. This past year has been busy for our group, and COVID's still here. We don't seem to be able to shake the bug. It'd be really nice to be saying this in person across the country, but once more, we can't do that. So please bear with me. Started off the year, the OIE has recognized Canada as negligible risk for BSE. This is a monumental event. It puts us on the same playing field as our biggest competitor and customer, the United States. It takes away any country's reasoning to not give us the same access as the US. So it is monumental. We moved from BSE to the drought that everybody's heard about for a long time, from Ontario west to the Pacific Ocean, the fires in BC. The sheer scale of this drought is what makes it so remarkable. I know in this part of the world, I think we were over 30 days above 30 degrees Celsius, which is unheard of. We went to work as CCA, along with our provincial members, and us working federally, the provincial members working with the province, we did manage to get some Agri Recovery money. Anybody who's eligible, I would encourage you to apply. If you haven't already, it's amounts to approximately $200 a head. We won't know if this is all that we're going to ask for or not until we get the final tally of the devastation of the drought. Another pretty monumental thing that, in my mind, the UN hosted its Food Security Summit. This is I don't know if it's a 25-year event, but this is the first time it's happened in 25 years. They went into this summit with a definite lean towards plant-based protein, and to the point of eliminating animal agriculture. We, the CCA, along with Nature Conservancy Canada, hosted, I believe it was 3 dialogues last spring, where we were pointing out the benefits of animal agriculture, and in particular the cattle industry, to the environment and to a nutritious diet. There was numerous summits held. We coupled ourselves with different organizations around the world, and we successfully moved the UN to accept animal agriculture as part of a sustainable diet, to the point that Canada's permanent representative to the FAO, her quoted, and I'll read you the quote: "Canadian livestock producers are global leaders in sustainable production of protein with one of the lowest greenhouse gas emission profiles. Through sustainability assurance programs, Canada's producers are demonstrating their commitment to further lowering their environmental footprint and making strong socio-economic contributions. Now, end quote. I can assure you that this would not have happened without the combined efforts of a global movement on this, and I would suggest led by the CCA and our staff. This all rounds out to be, to me, shows the importance of a well-funded producer organizations, both provincially and federally. This stuff comes at a cost, and you don't get to sway the UN without spending some money to do it, on staff, on research, on everything else. Our checkoff is what contributes to our industry. I think it's what makes us one of the leading cattle industries in the world, both in our policies at home and internationally. I would encourage everybody to support their local or their provincial members through the checkoff, because we don't get to produce, be one of the world leaders in trade, one of the world leaders in reputation, by not spending money on our industry. The checkoff is what has allowed us to do all this stuff. So just in those closing remarks, I'd like to turn it over to Dennis Slaycraft.
And thanks, Bob. On behalf of our staff, we want to give a quick update on many of our activities this past year. And I'm going to start with a little bit of explanation on our structure. CCA is kind of divided into two parts. We have our CCA policy division. That's where we work on all our national and international government relations. That's entirely funded by the provincial portion of the checkoff. Then we have our operating divisions that are either funded by subscription like CanFax, or by membership like our newly joined Beef Breeds Council that are now part of CCA, or the others are funded by national checkoff that carry out research in our public and stakeholder engagement work. Now, when you take a look at the CCA portion of that, you can start to see where a lot of our energy and effort goes into this. Clearly, trade, our US advocacy, we export close to 40% of what we produce to the United States. And then the rest of our foreign trade, all of these things add up, as you'll see later, to over $600 a head in extra value to our industry. We do a lot of work on domestic ag, particularly as we head forward into the next our Canadian Agriculture Partnership, the 5-year program moving forward. We've recently added food policy, which we'll talk about. Environment, particularly as we're dealing with the climate change issues that we're dealing with. And our young cattlemen is one of our really important programs, and animal health and animal care are always a big part of what we do. As you take a look at this, we were funded basically based on a calculation using marketings and establishing how much by province, and each province then receives a corresponding number of directors. This past year and 2 years, really, we've continued to work on the COVID response. And that's really making sure that we maintain business continuity, ensure borders remain open and trade continues. Unfortunately, we still have some restrictions as we deal with China, but that's a very complicated file. And we lobbied for the business risk management enhancements. And that actually resulted in the removal of the reference margin limit, which increased coverage by another $95 million. And a lot of that really made a significant impact to cow-calf producers. And resilience. As we moved through this, we found, again, some areas where we were vulnerable. So we continue to take a look at how do we address those capacity constraints, and making sure as we move forward, we're better prepared each time we go through an event like this. So at this stage, I'm going to turn it over to Fawn, where she'll talk about our trade work.
forward to sharing with you today a little bit about the international trade as well as the climate change files as they impact Canadian beef producers. So starting out on the trade file, things continue to be quite exciting, I would say, and we are set to set another record this year, which I think, given the number of challenges that we've had with COVID and drought, I think really speaks to the resilience of this industry. And really our success is based on a number of trade agreements that over the last number of years have come into place. As you can see on this slide, that with each new trade agreement, of course, we see another bump. And this is very important because, as everybody I'm sure knows, we export around 50% of what we produce, and this export ability means that we get about $600 per head more per animal than if we instead just sold it into the domestic market. So certainly trade has always and will always be a very key priority for CCA. This year in July, which is our latest trade data, Canadian beef exports were up 13% from July of 2020 and up 32% actually from the 5-year average. And I know you're all wondering, well, what about on the import side? Because of COVID last year, of course, we saw quite a large increase in imports. So we're actually down in comparison to last year of about 33%, and then to the 5-year average about 12%. So trade continues to go well. But of course, it's never without its problems and never without need for further improvement. And so what are our trade priorities in the coming year? Certainly with the US being our biggest customer and our biggest trading partner, it's always going to be a priority to maintain that. And certainly we have been watching very closely the mandatory country of origin labeling discussions that have been going on down there. In particular, there is an effort right now to look at voluntary cool, and we are pleased to see that Secretary Vilsack, whenever he talks about it, of course, talks about WTO compliance. And so while we're pleased to see that, that doesn't mean that we're not very closely watching that file. For us, in the next number of years, Asia really holds the biggest potential. And we are in particular really focused on the expansion of CPTPP, which has driven much of our recent trade success. So a number of economies have expressed interest in joining CPTPP. And as long as they can meet the progressive nature of that agreement, we are really keen to see other economies join, such as Taiwan and South Korea and the UK. A little bit more complex. China has also expressed interest, and I'm sure that there will be many conversations about what that might look like in the future. Of course, Europe has, since the implementation of CETA, has caused us some challenges, but we are looking forward to the future, as this is a very high value market for us, pushing that $12, $13, $14, $15 per kilo, where our other markets are more in the $6, $7, $8 per kilo value. So we are looking at how we can really optimize this market. And of course, this last year, we gained our BSE negligible risk status. And so there are some markets that still have BSE restrictions. And so we are looking to remove those final BSE restrictions here in the coming months and I suppose years, because sometimes these take a little bit of time. So that's on the trade file. And now moving over to the climate change file, which has been a very big one for this government. I think that no matter what party had gotten in, climate change and the environment would have been very big priorities. And the thing that I think we are most proud of in the beef industry is that we all know that we have a very good story to tell when it comes to environment and climate change. And not only that, but we are very strategic to make further commitments for improvement. And I think that that's going to position us very well to strategically direct investments that are going to be coming from federal and provincial governments in partnership with Manitoba Beef Producers, of course, in their funding commitments in the coming years. Overall, of course, for us, the grassland ecosystem is certainly a big factor in our carbon sequestration story, in our ability to further make environmental improvements. So I think we'll see that that continues to be a priority. And so with climate change, we are seeing this government, they are focusing on carbon markets, they are focusing on developing the regulations that would go along with that. They have net zero commitments, they have research investments that they're making. And so we are going to be working very hard to make sure that producers are part of the conversation, and we know that we are certainly part of the solution. So with that, I'll now pass it off to the next CCA presenter.
Okay. Like I said, so the second half of that has a bit more information from other aspects. So CPCA will be, posted on our website. So I'm just going to kind of go through. I think no thoughts in particular as of yet, Audrey, on the impending strike at Cargill, but I know it's discussions I'll be having with our provincial counterparts on it, and what sort of influence the industry can provide there. I think the question as it relates to packing plant margins and having that passed down, that's been an age-old challenge within the sector, and it's something that we bring up, but with these various organizations and to government. But at the end of the day, this may take a governmental action to get some market transparency influence, and it's a North American problem, or you could say a global problem in the beef sector, with the amalgamations that have happened in some of these packing plants. And I think it's important to recognize that the U.S. in particular is looking. There's legal action happening going on to see what sort of changes need to be implemented. And with a lot of these packing plants being based out of there, it could have some benefit to and some, I guess, direction for the Canadian government to take, because it's all about influence with the multinational company and leverage, and some of this stuff may need to be government decisions from a competitive standpoint. I think there's a black screen on the square. Your video, or actually part of the video. Sorry, Jennifer. I wasn't aware of any challenges there. That was actually a direct message to me. So just realized that as well. Okay, so next up on the agenda is an overview of our proposed updates to administrative bylaws. I'm just gonna share my screen here. All righty. Apologies, folks. I'm just having a bit of a technical glitch here. I'm just trying to get figured out, so bear with me. Okay, so hopefully folks can see this when I get up. I, for some reason, can't see anybody anymore. I can't see any of the video screens. So I'm gonna, if anybody's raising their hand or anything, Dave, I might ask you to step down the hall to let me know, because for some reason I can't see anybody involved in the meeting except for my slides. So the joys of the virtual meeting. But anyways, the purpose of here is just to give you an overview of what MVP is looking to do in terms of our administrative bylaw and what we're looking to update to be taken to our 43rd AGM and approved there or put for consideration. So the three adjustments are in relation to three main areas. The first one being a director term extension, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Same with an external appointment provision and realignment of certain districts due to previous municipal amalgamations. So as it relates to the current terms of office, a director can currently hold their seat for up to 3 consecutive terms, so 6 years. And when we consider what other provinces do, what their minimum length are, or other provincial cattle associations, and the importance of succession within the sector, our board feels, and staff influence, but our board feels that there is definitely benefit to extending this this term length another up to 4 consecutive terms. So effectively allowing a director to sit for 8 years if they want. It's not a life sentence, and it would be a term. So every 2 years come up for election where folks in that district have the potential to either vote that individual out or keep them in. But it just allows that individual to take more advantage of potential leadership opportunities for a lot of the national organizations like CCA. When we're only at 6 years and the other groups have a minimum of 8, and some have no minimum, it restricts our ability as producers here in Manitoba to be able to get up to the next stage of leadership, which is at a national level. So that's really the justification behind this particular recommended change. The next one is external appointment provision. So currently in our bylaws, it doesn't say that we can or can't externally appoint somebody to sit on a national or committee or standing committee or something external from the board that aren't board members. So in past, it's been practiced to do that. And it all depends on the decision at the board at the time. But we felt like we need to have something in here similar to what BC did, that specifically states that the board, at their discretion, can appoint somebody that doesn't sit on the board to be our representative for a national association. For example, Audrey from Hemiota Feedlot, she is our current representative for the National Cattle Feeders Association. So it's something that we've done in practice, but we feel it's important to have it in the bylaws, just clarifying that. And then it relates to border changes due to municipal amalgamation. I'm not going to read this long motion that was passed by the board of directors, but I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides of the visually how it's going to impact some of the district borders. So this map here is the historic RM listing when our bylaws were effectively made a number of years ago now. And for example here, Langford and North Cyprus, they were separate RMs. So they fell into separate District 5 and District 8. But with the amalgamation that happened, they are now one district. So we needed to make a decision on where the border falls for these certain districts, so it's not cutting through the middle of an RM to make it confusing for producers on where they fall in terms of their district. So the decision was made by the board to do it as such, where these amalgamated districts would now be in these proposed districts. So District 8 effectively gets 2 new smaller areas within their borders. District 5 lost a small portion, and District 7 gained a small portion from District 13, which in part lost a small portion. So really that's been that was decided upon by the board of directors as the best approach for the new borders that will be updated in the bylaws, pending approval at our AGM. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and if happy to entertain any questions related to the bylaws specifically. Okay, not coming up. And again, this is, this is for information. A lot of this stuff will be, put in our different cattle country media packages leading up to AGM, which we'll talk about further on the agenda here. But it's not approved till then. So next up on the agenda is a video from Ray Bittner on the Predation project. So I'll get that teed up for you here.
Hello, my name is Ray Bittner. I'm the Livestock Predation Lead with Manitoba Beef Producers, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the Livestock Predation Protection Pilot Project. This project is a 3-year project, and it'll span from 2020 to 2023. The funding is from the province of Manitoba, Manitoba Beef Producers, and Manitoba Sheep Association. We have representatives on our committee from the Manitoba Sheep Association, Manitoba Beef Producers, Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development, Manitoba's Trappers Association, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Our mission statement is to reduce predator-livestock interactions, and the various themes are livestock management to reduce predator interactions and predator mitigation strategies. Within that, we want to use proven management techniques, such as number 1, improve animal health. So no limping cows, no laying around calves. We don't want any easy pickings for predators. Number 2, remove food source. No carcasses. No reason for predators to come back if they don't have anything right now. And number 3, group livestock. Pull livestock into tighter groups with no compromised livestock. Theme 2 is predator management. Can we fence out predators during vulnerable periods, such as calving, lambing, or weaning? Is physical fence the necessary thing, like chain link wire, electric mesh? Those things work, but are they necessary? Do we have to go that heavy duty? Can we go with psychological fence, such as flattery wire, lights, sounds, or guardian dogs? The problem of predators are very significant. The Manitoba Agriculture Service Corporation has a program that compensates producers for losses that they can document. In the 5 years between 2015 and 2019, you can see on this slide, there has been a very significant number of animals. And it has to be noted that these are only the ones that are found and documented. There are many more calves, cows, and various animals that aren't found and accordingly not claimed. When you look at it, there's well over 1,000 beef calves lost and compensated every year. So that's a very significant loss. It should also be noted that it's not equal across the province. Certain producers are much more affected and certain producers are not affected at all. So the effects can be very drastic on individual operations. This is the table for sheep, and you can see that on an average year, there's somewhere between 100 and 300 losses of lambs. There's certainly some ewes lost, and once again, this is only the number that are found and documented. So this is a very significant problem to our industry, and we are trying to work on solutions. To begin our interaction with the public, we had a producer survey. You may have seen it in your mail, or you may have seen it in cattle country. We received 550 responses, and to that we say a big thank you. Average beef cow herd size was 162, sheep ewes 151, and confirmed livestock losses. We had some zeros, and we had some producers who lost up to 100 livestock due to coyote, 60 due to wolf, 60 due to black bear. And this was represented over 231 separate postal codes. So it was a good survey, and we are appreciative of all the responses. If we look at some of the basic information from the survey, we found that 485 beef producers responded, 70 sheep, and 28 other. So it was a primarily beef and sheep survey. We also found a fairly typical number that coyote was the largest share of the problem at 7,200 confirmed or suspected losses. Wolf at 2,600, bear 1,390, and cougar at 100, and fox at 272. Now we recognize that fox is not likely much to do with beef, it's more likely to do with smaller animals. So what have we done so far? Basically, this is our list, and as we go through each, we're checking them off. So number one, we wanted to quantify the problem of predation, the species, the numbers, locations. Our information from MASC and the database that we set up with the survey has helped us do that. We researched mitigation techniques, so we looked for things that would work. We called on industry experts to try and find some things, and we think we've got that. We surveyed producers' needs. That's the survey I was mentioning earlier. We introduced the mitigation techniques. We had this similar presentation at MVP annual meeting in spring this year. We prepared a list of RMPs, which is risk mitigation practices, and we have lists and descriptions. Those are things that you can find on the Manitoba Beef Producers website and review them for yourself. We've contacted adversely affected producers. We haven't contacted all of them, I should say, but some of the major ones we've tried to contact, discuss some of the problems. Some people have jumped in on the RMPs, some people opted not to, and we're okay with that. We purchased a bunch of assets, which was a bit of a circus in 2021 due to supply shortages on stuff, but we have purchased a good amount of assets that we can put onto farms, and much of them are already on farms. We've installed mitigation techniques and practices, so you'll see a list later, and we've got that installed. But so far we haven't really got any results. You know, most of the stuff has just been put in the last few months, so we'll be doing that in the future. We'll have some final reports, we'll have some recommendations, and we'd be glad to share the results and aid in the implementation in the future for the practices that really work. So the risk mitigation practices that have been installed. We've given out several veterinary herd assessments and consultations. They are going out, and veterinarians and producers will work together to try and come up with the healthiest animals possible for predator season. Predator resistant pens, we've got 4 of them built. Predator resistant composting pens, we have 6 of them built as of October 21. Fladry wire for calving and lambing areas, we're only at a small amount of adoption with that, with only 1 so far. Pasture electronet, we've got 6 on the go right now. Fox lights, 6 as of October 21. Game cameras, we've got 13 out there. And then GPS collars to monitor the herd and the flock, we have 4 out of a total of 4 that we wanted to install as of August. So they're all up and running. So overall, the RMPs initiated and installed as of October 17th, we've got 57 separate practices crossing over 11 beef producers and 7 sheep producers. So to go over the individuals, we have a veterinary herd assessment for herd health. And basically the idea is to improve the herd health and identify individual animals which are compromised. You can work with a veterinarian of your choice. You develop a plan to have the strongest group possible on predator susceptible pastures. And this assessment can be part of your veterinary client-patient relationship protocol, which is something that you need to be able to purchase many of the current drugs that the veterinarians distribute. The value of this is a $300 credit towards the visit and the consultation, and it is no charge to eligible producers. Ineligible producers means somebody who has completed the survey, who has some predator losses, and is willing to answer some questions for us. So if you're interested, please contact us. The next risk mitigation practice is the cattle or sheep GPS collars. It's basically a collar that wraps around the neck, and it'll help identify livestock location, movement, and temperature of the animal. It allows you to detect unusual movements. If you see your cattle racing all over the pasture, you can be sure that something is probably causing that. You can also set up virtual fences. So if the cattle blow through a gate or blow through a fence line, you can get a note that gets sent directly to your cell phone, and you have an alert to go look for what's going on. So basically, the real beauty of this though too is if you're going out to check your cows, you know where the group is, you can move straight to it and do your predator surveillance much more quickly. The cost to the producer to set this system up was $750, and we sold this out in 2021. We have it on 2 AMCP pastures, 1 individual beef producer, and 1 individual sheep producer. So we're going to try and get some feedback on how this works and whether they can help the producer cut back on predation losses. This is an example of what you see. The green spots are individual cows, and the gray spot with the gray line is where the cow moved in the last few hours. So you can see that that cow was not terrified. It wasn't ripping around the pasture. It gently meandered a few hundred yards in the last few hours. So that's the type of information you can pull off with these collars. ElectroNet. ElectroNet is a portable small ruminant fence system. And as you can see from the picture, it's got stays in the ground. It's got plastic and stainless steel netting that gives a good shock to both the sheep on one side and the coyote on the other side. The idea is to have 2 1-acre grazing cells, and the package that we bring out to you will have the electric fencer, it'll have the posts and stays, and it'll have the ElectroNet. Cost to producer is $500, and this fits best for sheep or goat producers. Risk mitigation fox lights. This is kind of neat. It works by having a nighttime light show that modifies predator behavior. The little thing in the top corner here is only about twice the size of a hockey puck, but it has the blue light, a red light, a white light, and it's actually quite bright. You can see it from a very long ways. It has unusual timing. Sometimes it looks like a police car going around. Sometimes it's just the occasional just shot of light. While it's not a solid wall fence or anything like that, it may give a predator pause to not walk into the pen just because they're unsure of what this light show is all about. We're setting this out on test. The cost for 4 of these solar fox lights is $165. And if somebody takes this, we insist that you're going to answer some questions. Do you believe it works? Do you believe it doesn't work? Did it work well? So that's what we're working on. Dead stock composting pens. What we're trying to do here is have a predator-proof or predator-resistant pen to compost your mortalities. So basically, anytime you find something that a predator wants to eat, you throw it in the pen and you get it composted. We build it out of chain link fence. It's got tight fitting gates, and it's a location to compost and remove food attractants from predators. If a predator comes to your farm, doesn't see anything or smell anything that they want to eat, hopefully they just keep moving along and go check out the next grain farm or something instead of your farm. This cost is well subsidized. It only costs $375 for the producer to install, and we install it for you. There are still a couple of these left if producers are interested. Risk mitigation practice, predator-resistant livestock penning. Basically, this is a 5-acre pen that divides predators away from livestock with high tensile electric fence. It's got a 7-wire fence. The bottom wire is very close to the ground. And we have predator resistant gates, basically the concrete threshold under a very strong small mesh gate. So what we're trying to do is find out, can this really work? Does the grass ground out the bottom wire too much? How well does this work? Is there problems with water in springtime, with snow? The cost to producer is $560 for a 5-acre pen, so not very costly to the producer, but they're going to have to answer some questions. Did it work? What did you have to change to make it work? RMP Fladry wire. Fladry wire is an electric fence wire with sewn streamers. If you look in the picture, you'll notice there's a barbed wire fence and then a little white wire with little red streamers hanging from it. While this doesn't look scary to humans, for some reason this seems to be scary to wolves and coyotes and canine. And the intention is that the animals walk up near the fence, and because they're curious about the red flags, they basically sit there and watch them, but probably turn around. There is scientific evidence to prove that they actually do turn around and walk away for a temporary period, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. What our intention is to do is to find out whether this really slows down the predators enough to make it justifiable. The cost of producers to build a 5-acre Fladry fence is $610. We provide the electric fencer, we provide the Fladry and the fence posts. Risk mitigation practices other. We had a lot of interest in doing something for people with guard dogs. And one of my first things I thought of was, let's put a GPS collar on the dogs so we know where they are. Are they sitting outside on the deck of your house? Are they with your flock, or are they with your cows? Are they off with somebody else's cows? Are they off with somebody else's dog? So basically we brought in a GPS receiver built for dogs. Works really, really well. It can tell your location of your dog 24 hours a day. It has a virtual fence notification, so your cell phone will ding when the dog leaves your property or wherever you designate it should be. It has the history of where its locations. It has heat map where the dog basically lives and spends his time. The cost isn't that much, $100 per year. However, we found out that in typical Manitoba scenarios, we only have a 48-hour battery life with normal Manitoba cell phone signal, which disappointed us to quite a large degree. We've passed on this RMP, but it gives us a bit of an example of there's great ideas out there, but the initiation and practice doesn't quite work out. You can see it's a nice small item, but the battery life is so short that probably not practical. If you have this on the dog for 2 days, then your dog wanders off. You may not know where your dog went because the battery died. So there's things to learn, and that's what we're doing. Risk mitigation practice, game cameras. We're helping producers get game cameras to identify predators and their behaviors. They work at night and they work during the day. We have a system with cold weather battery package and a solar panel, so this thing's going to work summer and winter. We have remote antennas for distant cell signals, so if you're in a poor cell area, we could probably get most areas of Manitoba working with the extra antenna. For an LTE cell phone enabled one, we're charging $285, and a memory card model only $62. So very subsidized costs, but you have to report back how well they worked. So the next steps, as of October 2021, we're still looking for cooperators for many of these RMPs. It requires filling out our standard survey, some level of past predator losses or challenges, and a willingness to share results and improvements. The end goal is to be able to recommend practical and successful predator mitigation strategies. So if you have an idea, we're willing to consider new ideas. And if you're aware of any new technology out there that may help us or maybe something that you want to try, get in contact with me. we'd be glad to discuss it, see where we can go with this. If you're interested in participating or have any questions, certainly get a hold of me. My name is Raymond Bittner. I'm the lead. My email is here, rbittner@mbbeef.ca, and there's my cell phone number. Call or text, I'd be glad to talk to you. Thank you for your attention, and good luck in the coming calving season.
Awesome. Hey, Audrey, I noticed that you've got some interest in some of the stuff that Ray put there. Missed his contact information. We'll get it put in the chat in the next little bit here, or next few minutes. But if not, just I'll flip you an email and give you some of that information, because it's some of these like the Fox lights and the temperature on the GPSs would be good to talk with him directly. So. And Shauna, I see that you have your hand raised, so I'm just going to ask you to unmute, so you should see something prompt you're up on your screen here. Okay, so I'm not sure, Shauna, if you haven't if you're seeing something come up on your screen asking you to unmute, but we'll kind of keep trying. But we'll move on the agenda, and if your hand stays raised, we'll try to get you opened up again to ask the question. So, okay, so next up on the agenda, seeing as this is an information session, we're going to explain the resolution process again this year for the virtual meetings. I'm just going to again share my screen. So because of the change to some of the meetings, and we've gone virtual, we're accepting resolutions again in writing into the office in advance of our 43rd AGM, which is going to take place on February 10th of 2022, and I'll talk about that a little more in the next couple slides. So this is an example of the form. We used it last year during our full district meetings slate, and it gives examples and detail on how to submit this. We ask that, if you want it in cattle country for producers to see in the December issue, that you send it in no later than this Friday, so we can get that, ensure that we get it laid out in the December edition. But there will be opportunity to send these resolutions in all the way up to February 3rd for consideration, and all these resolutions will be considered by a resolutions committee internally to ensure that they make sense, and that they aren't something that we're already advocating for, and then they'll be brought forward for debate at our AGM and posted on our website in advance as well, so folks know that are able to attend AGM. Speaking of AGM, the plan this year is to hold a one-day session in Brandon on Thursday, February 22nd. That'll have a business component and some interesting speakers, as well as an option to take it in virtually. So this plan is obviously contingent on any public health orders and where we'll be at in terms of COVID restrictions in the next couple months here. But that's the tentative plan right now. So we encourage you to just watch our website, social media, e-newsletter, Cattle Country for all that information. And I really hope that that you can attend, because it'd be great to see many of you, and it's been awesome seeing many of you across the province these last number of weeks at some of our in-person sessions. So with that effectively wraps up the main business side of the agenda. Happy to have any final comments or questions folks might have before we adjourn this evening. And apologies, Shauna, I don't know why they asked the unmute didn't work, but feel free to give me a shout at the office here if there's something, whether it's predation related or not, that you want to chat about. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything pop up here, so I really, again, want to thank you all greatly for taking the time out of your busy evenings, because I'm sure everybody's looking at that forecast for tomorrow, and you know, I hope there's nothing like detrimental that happens from it, but we can always use the moisture at this point, and I think that'll be important to get a bit of that moisture. It's looking like it's coming in big amounts in certain areas, so stay safe out there, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.